Hello. And so today we're continuing on. This is lesson 8 on connective tissues. We've already spent one entire day just on epithelial tissue, but there's 3 other types. So we have our epithelial, which we've already done, and then the 3 other types are connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. And today we're spending one whole class just on the connective, muscle, and nervous tissue. Having said that, we'll spend very little time on muscle and nervous tissue because we spend a great deal of time later on in the course on that. So connective tissue has a lot of jobs. It binds, it supports, it protects our bones, it forms blood, which is one of the things you probably did not know. Connective tissue is where fat is stored, and it helps fill spaces. And here I have listed out 5 types of connective tissue. I'm going to spend a moment to talk about some of the stranger things in all of sciences, and especially in anatomy, where depending on the textbook, depending on the professor, there's going to be different numbers of connective tissue, depending on how the textbook writer for that section, and usually when you're writing a textbook, they choose a different person for almost every chapter. One of the only differences of that is in the Marieb series, where Dr. Marieb writes the entire book, and we have one of her books. And in this case, the types of connective tissue can be listed as 4, 5, or 6 types of connective tissue. And let me give a brief explanation of that. Here I've listed 4 types, and loose and dense as being what is considered to be proper connective tissue. This is the ones that do all of the supporting and the actually connecting of tissues. And those can be separated out as to what they do, loose and very dense connective tissue. So in some textbooks, they separate those out into 2 different categories. And the loose can be separated out one more time to some textbooks consider adipose to be so important, or fat tissue, that they pull it out of the loose category and give it its own section. So loose can be divided into loose and adipose separately, dense, cartilage, bone, and blood. So that is where you'll get the difference between 4 categories, where the loose and dense are considered to be proper connective tissue and can be maybe linked together, or they could be separated. And then they could also pull out adipose, or your fat tissue, then cartilage, bone, and blood. So here I've showed you, I put the title or the header as 5 types of tissue, but if you look around them, you'll see that it is divided into 6 categories, where loose and dense, or your fibrous. Dense is also known as fibrous tissue. So if you look at A, loose tissue, B, the pulled out adipose, the blood, going up to your top right, that fibrous is also known as dense tissue, and cartilage, and then bone. So now with our connective tissue proper, your loose and dense, there are 6 different types of loose, and you do not need to know the 6 different types of that. All you need to know is the overall function of loose and the overall function of dense. And again, you do not need to know the 3 types of dense tissue. So loose connective tissue is known as a binder. It also provides water and salt and fat storage. An example of that is your fat tissue, or adipose. And women tend to have an extra adipose or fat layer in the abdominal cavity, and it is believed to be an evolutionary piece that women still haven't lost. And if you think about that, during early times when food shortages would have been into account, women did not really time pregnancy back then to when harvest time would be, and they would be at their fittest. Women had that extra fat storage so that if things got lean, they still had enough fat storage to be able to give enough nutrients to their unborn baby. And dense are the ones that you're probably a little bit more familiar with, and they are very thick, fibrous tissue. And the biggest example of that is collagen. And collagen, unfortunately, in the human body tends to start degrading, or we're not making as much of that after the age of 50. And throughout the entire course, I'm going to be telling you what happens at different ages of your body. I've already given in one lesson that the kidney reaches its peak functioning at age 30, and after that you better be pretty careful about your kidneys, because they do not function function at top performance after the age of 30. Well, after the age of 50, you start aging. And so even as I look through the photo albums of the family, I can see my mother at her 50th birthday, and then within 10 years, she is quite wrinkled, and another 10 years after that, and she has lost a little bit of height, etc. And so that is also, I am in my 60s. So if you take pictures, looks at the yearbooks of when I first arrived at the building, when, at age, 50 or so, I didn't look so bad. And now we're definitely getting more and more wrinkles. And so collagen, for example, plumps up your upper lip. And so I virtually have no upper lip left. And when the collagen starts leaving that area, what happens with the shrinkage is then you get heavy wrinkling above the upper lip. So if I was vain, or if I was a movie star, if I had to worry about my appearance, or I cared about my appearance more, I could get collagen injections in a variety of spots, and that would plump up the lip. And so it's not Botox, which would freeze where the person would have limited ability to move because it affects the nerves. Collagen does the plumping, and because it plumps that upper lip, it causes the wrinkling effect. The wrinkles are still there, but not as visible. And along with other examples of collagen is supporting of the mammary glands. In a male, it would be supporting the testicular area. And so, of course, that starts to sag with age, and you could have reconstructive surgery to fix those, but it's still going to sag with time. And then our second type, if we're including loose and dense as together, our second type would be the cartilage that you're most familiar with. And we have 3 types of cartilage. Again, for your test, I would not expect you to know that there are 3 types, but I will spend a few minutes with those. Your hyaline is the most common, and it covers the ends of long bones, the tip of your nose, and it connects the ribs. So I've already showed you femur and the humerus. Those were the first couple bones that I started to have you learn, and this would be the upper leg bone. It is the longest, hardest bone of the body. And the head and the bottom of the base of that, along with another long bone, your humerus, the upper arm bone, the head and the bottom of that, are covered in hyaline. And what happens if you're using your arm back and forth, you need to have that support and that protection so that it is not clicking and grinding. And for any of you that play golf or a lot of basketball, anything that is using an awful lot of that arm movement, you can have issues with the hyaline actually being overworked. On the back, and I've showed this to you once before, on the back of the humerus, we have that fossa, or the depression, where I'll show you later on another bone that connects to that, the ulna. And so we have hyaline there so that when you are moving your arm back and forth like a lever, then we need that hyaline to be protecting there. Another type of hyaline cartilage is called costal cartilage. It is inside, or it connects, it's inside of our thoracic cavity, and it connects the rib cage to what is called the sternum. So here is the sternum, what you know is your breastbone, and there are 3 parts of the sternum. Again, this is just an easy way for me to introduce a couple of the parts of the skeletal system without you having to learn all 206 bones at one time. But in the sternum, we have the top or the head of that is called the manubrium. Then we have the body of the sternum, and then we have the very tip here, which is going to become important when you learn CPR, the xiphoid process. But all of this is hyaline cartilage that has a specific name called costal cartilage. And these ends of this connect to rib cage. And what happens is that if you have an injury, let's say, for example, I was mountain biking, this is quite a few years ago, and I was not paying attention, and I hit a rut at a very steep angle, and what happened is the entire upper body really took quite an amount of pressure to it. I was afraid that when I first stopped, because I was having trouble breathing, that I might have snapped the clavicle. Remember, that's the collarbone and the only hollow bone of the body, very easily broken. But instead what happened is that I had a separation where 3 of my pieces of costal cartilage actually separated away from the rib cage. And that is a not unusual injury in football, again, cross country or mountain biking, soccer, where a person may put their arm down to stop their fall, and what happens is it jolts everything, and then the cartilage can separate away. And every time the person takes a breath when that cartilage is separated, it is a very painful, almost like a little knife jolting inside, and it takes weeks for that to repair. A strange thing about that a lot of people don't know is this cartilage ends up turning with age bony. So again, usually around the age of 60, the costal cartilage no longer is as nice and flexible as it once been, and it turns into bony pieces. And that's why sometimes when the CPR is done on an older person, the ribs have broken, and it's not usually just the ribs that break, but that cartilage has turned bone, and that then allows for snapping or breaking. Other cartilage that you're familiar with are the cartilage, the elastic cartilage of the ears. The epiglottis is a flap of skin. When we're talking about the digestive system, we'll talk about. It actually protects and it goes up, moves up and down, and it keeps food from going into the lungs. So sometimes if you're talking or you're laughing and inhale, the epiglottis is in the wrong position, and you could aspirate or get a piece of food into your lungs. And that's just cartilage. And then we have fibrocartilage, and that is in the intervertebral discs. That's in between your vertebrae. So you have one vertebrae after another in your spinal column, and in between that are your discs. And the fibrocartilage is a type that gives some flexibility to that so that we can bend over, we can touch our toes, we can curl up. And you're also familiar with the cartilage that is in your knee, and the knees unfortunately take an awful lot of abuse, especially if you're that teenage athlete or older athlete in college or continue running as an adult. Your knees are hitting the pavement if you're doing any form of running. And if you're doing a sport that has side-to-side motion, hockey is a big one, football is another, the knee then has to be able to be flexible enough to go side to side and then turn on a dime really and go in a different direction. So oftentimes there are cartilage problems with athletes. And then our third type of connective tissue is bone, and I've just put down the two big categories and nothing more here. If I slice open, and when we go into the skeletal system, we will do a lab where the bone has been sliced in horizontally or transverse cut on a femur, and we can look in and you'll see the outside edge of the femur is solid hard. You could take a little hammer and bang away at that, whereas the inside portion of that is very spongy. And so the compact part is support, it protects us, and where that spongy part is where another form of our connective tissue, the blood, is formed. So most of you are not aware that blood is manufactured inside the bone. So blood is what we call very atypical of connective tissue, even though it does not provide support. And I will have this fixed for when you look at your Google slides, your PowerPoints. I've put support in here twice, I apologize. So it does not provide support or strength, as it should say. And then our most common of the blood types are the red blood cells, or your erythrocytes. But there is also the white blood cells, 5 different types, and there is platelets as well. And platelets are for clotting. So as a quick review here, we have spent an entire class on epithelial tissue. And today we've done connective tissue, where there are 4, 5, or 6 different types depending on the textbook. And you'll ask me for the test, what do I want you to write down? And I would say, however you want. I'm going to be accepting if you put loose and dense together, and cartilage, bone, and blood for 4. If you want to separate them out to 5, so loose and dense are separate, and then you have cartilage, bone, and blood. Or if you want to even pull it out one step further, so there's loose, adipose, dense, bone, cartilage, and blood. So those are our 4, 5, or 6 types of connective tissue. We then have muscle and bone, and we're going to spend very little time on that. There are 3 types of muscular tissue, and you will be expected to know the 3 types: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And the cardiac is purely for the heart. Skeletal muscle is over bone, and your smooth is over hollow organs other than the heart. And for nervous tissue, you have just your neurons and supporting tissue. And on lesson 9, we're going to be doing an entire lab on these tissues. Thank you.